talk about the costume design in Coming to America. Unsurprisingly, the sequel to the first Black fairy tale, 1988's Coming to America, confoundingly named Coming to America, was a big disappointment, as most sequels and reboots tend to be, especially when they're released 3 decades later. But today I really wanted to discuss the costume design of the sequel and whether or not it was successful and how it impacts the first film's iconic legacy. Coming to America is still one of my favorite movies to this day, thanks to the groundbreaking concept, the excellent performances, but most of all the work of the costume designer, Deborah Nadoolman Landis, who's really responsible for bringing Zamunda to life. It's one of the first instances of Black and African royalty in mainstream cinema, and you can still feel its impact and influence in all the media following since. I don't think we ever would have had Remember the Time, Black is King, The Lion King, Black Panther, and so much more had it not been for Zamunda. Of course, it is unfortunate that one of the most iconic Black films ever is about a fictional African country created by white American men. And while I don't have an issue with that specifically, or even African speculative fiction or made-up countries in general, after all, I'm a big fan of Genovia and Aldovia, it is important to know that if the majority of these stories are only told by Euro-Americans and they only cast Americans, then we must think about who it serves. It's very important in our celebration of all this media to understand that just because something utilizes Africa does not mean it represents Africa. What I like most about the costume design is also what I find a little bit concerning, and that it really is this collage of so many different African cultures, which on one hand I appreciate because you can tell that Landis has done her research in a time before the internet, and she treats everything she uses with respect and dignity. And it also speaks to how no culture exists as an island, and especially amongst African nations, there are so many intersections in our customs, styles of dress, and language. But on the other hand, considering the fact that we rarely get to see many stories at this scale that focus solely on a single African culture, we end up in a place where it seems like all African people look, act, speak, and dress the same. Yet I digress. Let's actually talk about the fashion in the sequel, which this time is the work of Ruth E. Carter. For those of you who don't know, Miss Ruth has been the brains behind School Days, one of my personal favorite films, BAPS, or Black American Princesses, and the Black Panther movie, for which she won an Oscar, and she's also recently received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, making her the second costume designer in history to ever do so. This is all to say that Miss Ruth is generally very excellent at her job, and of course I was very excited to see how one of my favorite costume designers would interpret one of my favorite movies. Unfortunately, many of my issues with the sequel itself actually relate to some of my criticisms and praises for the costume design. The plot is really overstuffed and underbaked, and too much of the runtime is dedicated to cameos and fan service.
From Zamunda.
Be a king. I got a dog named King. He ain't the king of this shop. I'm the king of this.
So the characters end up being one-dimensional, and the plot is basically nothing. The film tries too hard to appeal to younger audiences by trying to come off as more woke and progressive than the original, but its efforts end up doing the complete opposite to its new, socially conscious feminist messaging. So let's talk about how the sequel compares to the original overall. Different from the original, Carter actually worked with over 3 dozen designers, making sure to have North, East, West, and Southern African designers in the mix. You'll see that the South African actress, Nomzamo Mbatha, who is one of 2, maybe 3 African people in the cast, has her palace uniform made by Maxhosa Bailaduma. The palace servants also wear other knitwear from the brand. Mancho is also another South African brand which created 2 looks for each of the princesses, which are actually some of my favorites in the film. There's also the Cameroon American brand La Vie by CK, which created Mirembe's gorgeous wedding dress that features a train so big they actually had to put wheels under it so Nomzamo could stand. I also think that having her in this big red dress is a very lovely nod to Lisa's pink gown, which actually happened as a fluke, as Landis had to go with a pink instead of a white dress because Shari Headley next to Eddie Murphy's all-black look would not have shown up at all. It's really funny that we actually have racism in photography to thank for one of the best movie wedding dresses of all time. Carter also sourced a lot of embroidery, jewelry, and embellishment work from Indian designers such as the very notable and prolific J.J. Valaya, amongst others. Speaking of the jewelry, which in this film is absolutely phenomenal, there are several pieces from True Force by Grace and Afia Saki, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which are both brands from Ghana. And that our best homages to the original film is the version of Vanessa Bell Calloway's gold ball gown. In this movie, her niece, played by Teyana Taylor, is presented in the same manner to the Zamundan prince as a subservient arranged bride. And they dress Taylor in this amazing gold metal ensemble and headpiece by Laurel DeWitt. That designer is also responsible for some of the amazing crowns that we see on Princess Mika and Queen Lisa in the film. It's such a beautiful way to reference the original without being an exact derivative copy. In an interview for Town and Country, Carter also mentioned that she didn't want to repeat the fur pieces from the first film, as she feels like Akeem's daughter would be very anti-fur. This does make sense of what we see of Princess Uma, who introduces a veggie burger to McDowell's in order to reduce their carbon footprint. I do want to add that I found it quite tacky that they used the live-action Lion King set for McDowell's Zamunda. Anyway, I'm also a little bit sad that we didn't get to see the ocelot and lion's head, which Landis says she had actually ethically sourced in the first film. But Carter does an okay replication of it with this gold medal piece, but it really doesn't make the same statement and impact. Which brings me to my main concern with the overall look and feel of the sequel, which is that it just feels so much smaller and less expensive and less luxurious. It really feels like a made-for-TV sequel, which doesn't make sense when you consider the fact that the budget, which was about $60 million for the sequel, is almost twice that of the original film. The palace in the original just felt so grand, the decor was impeccable, and it really felt like a place you could get lost in. They've still kept the pointed arches and the domes on the facade of the palace, but for the interiors, this time they've used the inside of Rick Ross's mansion in Atlanta. While it is a 45,000 square foot estate with 109 rooms, 12 bedrooms, 235 acres of land, and 18-foot ceilings, it still doesn't quite measure up. Even as a point to this, in the original, you could see that you could fit an entire orchestra into Akeem's bedroom, but now Lisa actually had to walk downstairs into their foyer for a similarly sized orchestra to have room to play for her. Most of all, because this is Rick Ross's house, I am actually losing my mind over the fact that the same foyer we are seeing being used for the palace might be the background, which is the source of that really hilarious Drake meme. And that kind of just takes me out of the fantasy a little bit. Also, looking at the palace staff, I felt like the female staff's uniforms were really disappointing. I don't think the bare feet and crop tops of the original are all that much better either. But it's extra disappointing because one of the love interests is a servant in the palace, and she spends most of her time in this movie in this rather unflattering and uninteresting outfit. I think there are so many amazing Maxhosa pieces that could have been used, and considering how stately and refined the choir singers and the male staff look, I don't see why this could not have been extended to the women. If not at least Nomzama's character, since she's not a rose bearer, she's a groomer, which I think is a bit of a higher position or a little bit more high status. And I'm not going to address the bathers' uniforms, which I think were gross. But again, like, why did the women not look as grand as everyone else? My last overall criticism is that I wish they hadn't used so much print. When Carter was working on Black Panther, she actually made sure to stay away from wax prints because she knew that she was depicting an isolated, never been colonized country. So they would never have engaged with the Dutch-Indonesian wax prints such as Ankara and Shweshwe. And she instead focused on finding more indigenous fabrics and finding more interesting ways to depict an African look and feel. Which I want to add is that you can still make something look African without relying so heavily on Kente or Ankara or Shweshwe. The first film does this really, really well in the wedding scene. All the guests are in attendance are actually in solid pastel colors, and it still feels very Zamundan because they have their hair in ginormous head wraps. They've got the puff sleeves, those big peplums, which is a really big part of the aesthetic of African wedding attire. Let's talk about some of the characters specifically. Prince Akeem and General Izzy. I don't have very much to say about Akeem's styling other than that it's actually pretty excellent, and I think it's very true to how he was characterized in the first film. It really does feel like an authentic progression of the character. Prince Akeem, despite growing up as the only son of a king, was very down to earth and well adjusted, and you can see that in how refined his style was. It still felt very expensive, but it was really understated with monochromatic or muted palettes, clean lines. It was formal without being overdressed. And all the jewelry and detailing and embellishment was incredibly delicate and detailed, but still really subtle. This is carried on in the sequel, where we see a lot of embossed velvets, monochromatic senator-style suits, and of course the kufi hat, which Landis had decided on after seeing it on the first Kenyan president, Jomo Kenyatta. I hope I'm saying that right. I also like how she keeps Simi dressed in a very complimentary way to Akeem, in a way that shows that they're friends, while also depicting Simi's high status in the palace. And the subtlety and the refinement and just like the quiet elegance of Akeem's wardrobe is a very great contrast to the film's antagonist, General Izzy. He is a very stereotypical depiction of an African warlord, but Wesley Snipes is one of the best part of the movie, and I feel like he's so underused in this. The first time we see him, he's introduced by his soldiers, who all, by the way, arrive in Ray-Ban sunglasses, these camo outfits, and lots of bling, while singing his praises as the most well-endowed man in Africa. And he really hams up this performance and sells this campy, cartoonishly evil, like warlord character. I really enjoy how much he's over-accessorized, the fact that he's always cinching in his waist with a cummerbund, and I also really enjoy the variety of influences in his look. Like, you see a bit of the South African Defense Force in the style of his uniform, as well as Rwandan hairstyles in the way he does his hair. It's also an interesting contrast to his father's appearance in the first film, because there is a point where they're actually wearing the exact same outfit, from the gold tassel epaulets to the gold detailing on the chest, the green and red sash. But the way Snipe does the characterization and the way that Carter over accessorizes him shows you that these are two very different men, and you can see how between these two generations of men there's been a lot of corruption and change, and the sense of malevolence, which is just a very enjoyable, subtle story and character development aspect that I enjoyed. And even as well, Izzy sort of influences the way Akeem dresses, because when we see Akeem's most flashy outfit out of both films, which is a really beautiful orange suit featuring this print on the blazer that Carter had actually designed to be the royal family's print. This is the only time that we've ever seen him in like a very bold, brightly colored, flashy outfit. And it happens in the scene when he's trying to push back against Izzy's threat, and he's having to showboat in order to protect his masculinity and portray strength. This is also when we see Queen Lisa in her loudest and frankly her ugliest outfit, which has literal peacock feathers, which I think further emphasizes the peacocking that the Zamundan royal family has to do in front of General Izzy. Then in the end, you can see that they sort of start mirroring each other once they've achieved peace and harmony. And you have Akeem and Izzy having complementing details in their outfits with the color palette and the sashes. And I really enjoy how Carter sort of interpreted a very like classic navy, almost Scottish military look with this beautiful kente kilt, and there's less military elements and more of the sort of scholarly preppy style that Hakeem usually wears, and it does sort of reveal a redemption arc even though we never really get to see it. Princess Mika. The film forgets about Princess Mika so much. She has very little personality besides being a very good fighter and a strategist, and everyone in this film keeps trying to tell us that she is the rightful leader for Zamunda, but the film never really works at actually showing us. We're never given any justification or even motivation as to why she wants to be queen, besides the fact that she's the first legitimately born child, which kind of detracts from that girls are strong or girls are just as equal message. Funny enough as well, her biggest cheerleader is another woman, her mother, Queen Lisa, but they literally never speak directly to each other at any point in this film. Mika doesn't even interact with her own sisters either, which is a bit jarring considering this film's story at heart is about family. This lack of depth in the character boils down into how upsetting and disappointing and frankly just ugly I found her wardrobe in the film. I don't even think this is Carter's fault, because I imagine it's very difficult trying to build a look for a character when the film has not even really developed that character either. One of the worst looks Mika wears in this film is the Zamundan flag athleisure outfit during the sparring scene with her father. It was actually the actress, Kiki Lane's idea, to have Mika incorporate the flag into her outfit to show her patriotic dedication, which to me shows how even the actress felt like the character needed to be fleshed out. It looks really cheap, and I find that flat clothing is very much the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a tourist, not a budding monarch. It just doesn't make her seem very powerful, strong, or regal. Carter commissioned the Siberian American brand Jankoi for this look, along with the outfits that she and Lavelle wear during the lion whisker hunt, God forbid. I think Janko's work is really, really interesting, and it works so much better on Lavelle's outfit, and I wish they'd found a better way to incorporate this designer into Mika's wardrobe, because I think it could have achieved something really, really powerful. Her opening outfit, which again is our very first impression of her, works to make her seem almost invisible and underwhelming. It starts the trend of her constantly being dressed out of sync with her sisters, who, when we first see them, are both in matching long lacy white dresses, which I think are very fitting for young princesses. Mika follows behind in this coral, lacy, off-shoulder top and extremely short shorts. It wasn't until she greeted her parents that I realized that she wasn't a rose bearer or a special kind of servant to the princesses. The rest of her outfits are equally as underwhelming or disappointing. She's supposed to be this warrior princess, and I think in not wanting to make her look like the Dora Milaje, Carter went too far in the opposite direction, and she ends up looking very casual and juvenile. There are so many times where this addition of short shorts, which Carter wanted to add to also sort of embrace the idea of womanhood and femininity and sex appeal, that really end up ruining what could be amazing looks. And I really like the idea of turning to athletic wear instead of more military, utilitarian-inspired designs. But most of the time, she really ends up looking like she's just gone to the gym in the rush. Her formal looks are much better, like this beautiful painted leather dress by Mimi Plang, the electric blue number that she wears as well, and this lovely outfit at the funeral. But again, she always looks like she's someone completely separate from her sisters. Her final look, of course, is absolutely gorgeous and definitely fitting for a queen. The mothers. Speaking of queens, I think they really forgot about Lisa in this film too. Well, to be honest, a lot of the women in this movie are done a mighty injustice, in my opinion. In the first movie, the main reason why Akeem fell in love with Lisa was because she was a kind, headstrong woman with her own mind and her own ideas. We even see her looking very presidential. She's an active member in her community, and she's continually speaking up for herself. But now it appears that she's been doing absolutely nothing for 30 years. I find it very hard to believe that the Lisa of the first film would be content to live like this. She doesn't even do any sort of like outreach or community or diplomacy work. And then she goes on to have 3 daughters and has nothing to say about Zamunda's patriarchal laws until now. I don't even share with Lavelle or even Leslie Jones's character about what it's like to reconcile being a Zamundan with being a Black American. And we only get a very slight hint of how lonely she may have been all these years when she does finally start to bond with Leslie Jones's character. But that's also another character and the actress who I think has been done very dirty by this movie. So in order to have the male heir plot of this film, but still maintain the purity of the original love story, the filmmakers have decided that instead of Akeem having had an affair or something in order to have a long-lost child he doesn't know about, Prince Lavelle is born out of Leslie Jones essentially date raping Akeem 30 years ago when they were in Queens. I already don't appreciate this trend in recent movies where people think that they can play sexual assault for laughs or as something to gloss over just because a woman is doing it to a man. But I find it quite cruel to imply that the only way Akeem would have sex with this tall, dark-skinned woman is if he was drugged. Especially if you consider how much misogynoir Leslie Jones has been subjected to in her career because she's not a conventionally attractive, light-skinned or hyper-feminine woman. Like, when will people give this lady a break? So to that, I do at least appreciate how well and beautifully Carter dresses her in the film. None of her formal looks come off as like a joke or a joke on her. And I think Jones looks so amazing in these gowns. And I like how once she and Lisa become friends, they start matching in the way they do their hair and the silhouettes of their dresses. I also find it strange that since this movie was going for this sort of feminist message, you know, girls can speak up and own businesses and be benevolent dictators too. But Akeem's mom, who was a very significant part of the first film, isn't even mentioned until the last 20 minutes of this film, and she's used as a storytelling device to get Akeem back to America. Carter does reference a bit of Queen Aolan in Lisa's wardrobe by having her also in a sari still in the beginning at that dinner. But other than that, you could really be forgiven for thinking that this character has never existed. Prince Lavelle. When we first meet Prince Lavelle, he's very much this New York stereotype. He sags his pants, wears flannels over vests, has some fake chains, and of course he's got some Timbs on. I think the first scene is supposed to be the beginning of this arc of how people always underestimate him, but I don't know if it's really effectively carried out in the film. Soon after he meets his father and he's quickly convinced to be lifted from his life of selling fake basketball tickets to go live as a Zamundan prince, you see that at first he struggles a lot to fit into Zamundan aristocracy, and his style is split into two very distinct and opposing looks. This almost costumey Zamundan garb and then his original queen's outfits. Fortunately, his love interest, who we never really learn much about except that she wishes she could own a business, is really great at developing his character and making him realize he needs to be a prince on his own terms. And she gets him to find the middle ground of being Zamundan and being New York. He comes into the palace once he has this awakening with his uncle Reem, played by the ever excellent Tracy Morgan, in this beautiful tunic by Akiri Jones, a Nigerian brand which creates these beautiful Renaissance medieval inspired silk prints with black figures. I'm a big sucker for Christian iconography, and Akira Jones' work really reminds me of the work of Renee Cox and Kehinde Wilde, while also just coming off as way more luxurious than even the finest Hermes scarf. The coat he wears on the night of his coronation, I think it's his coronation, is also really stunning. And it comes at the same time when he's choosing love over duty by proposing to Mirembe, just like Akeem did 30 years ago. And I think it's just a nice way to reference each other and reference the first film. This look is still distinctly his own, but very much in line with what we come to expect of Zamundan royalty. Even when he runs away back to America, he's in a white shirt and jeans, but you see the black, red, and green beaded necklaces in place of what would have been gold chains earlier, which kind of speaks to how you can take the boy out of Zamunda, but you can't take Zamunda out of the boy. Then, finally, there's the wedding look, which is this beautiful senator-style outfit where he's in white and gold with a hint of red at his feet to match his bride, and the colors of his outfit also perfectly complement Princess Mika's dress. And the silhouette is very similar to Prince Akeem, well, King Akeem's at this point, which sort of ties them all becoming this family unit in the end and achieving peace and harmony. All in all, I don't think the costume design was terrible, and I do think it had a very big legacy to live up to, as I don't think there's any way to capture the original magic and wonder and just whimsicalness of the original film. After all, that was the first of its kind, and Coming to America 2 is happening in a time where we're actually seeing black royalty and regality more commonly. And you know what? I actually don't need Coming to America to be iconic or game-changing or revolutionary, because I think this also just provides more impetus for all of us to expect, number one, that when we're telling black stories that we're making them look really good, and we need to be making more space for actual African people to be representing themselves and telling their own stories. I also think that of that 60 million rand budget spent on this film, a lot of money was probably wasted on the millions of cameos. I mean, there was Morgan Freeman, Gladys Knight, En Vogue, Salt and Pepper, John Legend, and so many other people. And also on the very unsettling de-aging sequence with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, which I think could have been spent on jewelry or something, or set design. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. And I would really love to hear your thoughts on the film and the costume design and any other films that you've seen that depict or represent like black and especially African royalty that you could recommend. I think I should also be taking initiative to look up more stuff, and I have enjoyed that in my research for this film. I've learned about a few more really wonderful up and coming African designers, and I can't wait to see their work, and I love that at least this film has really put those people on. Anyways, that is the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.